welcome back. You're watching The Money Show with me, Kavita Thapliyal. Now, the government's decision to hike tax collected at source on international debit and credit cards has put the spotlight on foreign card spends. Remember, the use of an international credit card to make payments towards meeting expenses while overseas was so far not covered under the LRS. So, how will this hike impact your finances and what kind of impact will it have on your travel plans? Let's discuss all of this with Mohit Kabra, Group CFO, MakeMyTrip and Lokendra Saini, Chief Operating Officer, EaseMyTrip. Good evening, both of you, and welcome to the Money Show. Before I begin any question on the TCS, on international credit cards and spends, I really want to highlight this data that I was just going through in the morning. International leisure travels, has gone up 40% from June to August. That's what the data says, which is obviously 40% up, a robust recovery, but then it's still down 15 to 20% if we talk about the pre-pandemic period. So my question to you, Lokendra, here is what kind of a dip now going on with this kind of announcement you see coming up?
Thanks for having me on the show, Kavita. At this time, we are not seeing any difference or any change in the booking pattern for from the holiday goers. I think the decision that has been made has been made very recently, and those who had planned their travel had already planned it, or also considering that this is also the holiday time for everyone here in India. People still would not like to risk it much, and given that there is still a bit of uncertainty around how things are going to be shaping up around this, people are continuously booking their holidays. But it'll be interesting to watch how this goes on after a couple of months from here.
You elaborate on the uncertainty that Lokendra is pointing out?
So the uncertainty which I talk about is with respect to how the payment modes are being used at the time of making payment for your international travel. Also, depending on the instrument that is being used while you're making the payment, etc., is there. Plus, we also need to understand that if somebody is using a card which is issued outside of India, however the resident is India, whether that also gets covered into this or not. So there are a few questions that we are still trying to understand whether that also gets covered into the scheme or not.
Also, Mohit, the confusion that people are actually caught up now or are tangled with is actually the LRS and the TCS. Could you explain to our viewers what's the new clarification and how should international travelers look at it going on? I mean, a lot of it has been highlighted by Lokendra, but then what do you think about this confusion? What has been your experience so far post the announcement?
Hi, Kavita. No, thanks for having me on the show. There are two separate provisions, right? And if you look at TCS provision, actually there is a tax collection at source which is mandated at 5% currently, both on tour packages as well as on overseas travel services. And whereas if you kind of look at the LRS provisions, there is this exemption of 7 lakh which is available as far as spends under the LRS remittances are concerned for overseas travel services, right? And therefore there is this little bit of a confusion on whether this limit of exemption applies when it comes to tour packages also. So I just wanted to call out these are two separate, distinct provisions, and therefore they apply separately as such. What used to happen was earlier, like you mentioned, international credit cards were kind of exempt from LRS provisions, and they have not been brought under the LRS provisions as well. So now across international credit cards or debit cards, the TCS levy will be applicable, and the 7 lakh limit as clarified by the government will be applicable.
Right. Also, I just wanted to understand what is the kind of percentage of revenue that you get from tour packages? I mean, first, if I want to ask this to you, Mohit.
See, tour packages, particularly international tour packages, had been growing. But since the 5% TCS had been introduced about a few years back, we have seen a steady decline in the mix of package bookings. So earlier, probably we used to see same value of bookings being done across the year for international as well as for domestic packages. Currently, it has shifted very significantly in favor of domestic packages. The reason being, if you see in the manner that TCS is levied currently, all kinds of tour packages have to undergo a TCS levy of 5%, whereas travel services, to the extent they are below the 7 lakh limit, they do not kind of undergo a TCS levy, and therefore the customer sees an incremental 5% payout, and that has kind of led to a little bit of a shift in booking preference, particularly on overseas tour packages. What we're concerned is if this kind of rate goes up from 5% to 20%, that could be a very sizable kind of a difference that would come up and could lead to kind of very significant decline in tour package bookings for overseas travel.
Indra, your experience on tour packages, is it the same as Mohit elaborated and spoke about?
Yes, Kavita, this is more or less the same. However, we've not seen much of a difference in terms of our international packages, even with the inclusion of 5%, because coincidentally, this time also collided with the recovery travel, which people call it rebel travel and all. People have been looking out ways to experiment with new places, going out international more as compared to previously. So I think overall that number does not show any kind of implication that is created because of 5%. But I will 100% agree with what Mohit is saying with respect to the 20% change, because that is a very, very sizable amount, which results into somebody can easily shift from a long distance international travel to a short distance, or somebody just moving from a international immediately to a domestic. So that will have a sizable impact, definitely. And this will also have a big impact in terms of how travel companies have been planning to create a more experiential kind of a holiday destination and all of those places. Because we see that with the change in infrastructure and all, there has been a lot of new places which have come up. So that might get impacted a bit as we go after next 2 months.
Mohit, what about seeing rise in other payments, form of payments and other informal channels? Do you think this can lead to that?
It could. Like if you see, practically all digital payments or online payments will kind of get covered under the TCS. So it's only the non-digital payments that kind of it could increase the preference for the customer to kind of look for those options, because the quantum involved is pretty significant now at 20%. That's another concern, and see that kind of pretty much goes against the adoption of digital kind of payments that has been the focus of this government. I think the broader point is twofold. One, if you really look at it, the whole intent of levying TCS, as the government has called out, is not to levy it on small transactions, and more importantly, levy it from a perspective that where the disclosed income is kind of way below the nature of expenses being incurred, that the government wants to come in with a TCS provision. Ideally speaking, if you look at it, domestic cards or UPI payments, which do not have forex kind of payments enabled on them, usually see small value transactions. And also, if you see from a customer's point of view, he's making an INR payment or a rupee payment and not necessarily kind of making a forex kind of a booking. And therefore, the demand for the domestic travel or tour agents industry has been that we should keep these INR payments out of the ambit, and payments out of these domestic cards or UPI out of the ambit. International credit cards, debit cards could kind of continue to see this TCS levy, because these cards are forex enabled on them, and they also kind of typically have much larger limits, and higher value transactions happen typically on international credit cards and debit cards. So that's been one kind of an ask. And the second one is there should not be a differentiation between tour packages and booking of travel services on an individual basis. So if you book 3 separate hotels individually versus you kind of take a package from a tour agent, so long as you're kind of selling out or kind of paying similar amounts and these are smaller values, why should kind of individual travel services be getting an exemption limit, while the tour packages kind of don't see any exemption at all and get and TCS is levied irrespective of the value involved. So those are probably the two key asks for the travel industry, just to make sure that the domestic travel industry remains competitive and customer inconvenience is resolved, while the intent of the government is still taken care of.
Are you in line with these asks?
Yes, we have been calling out, these
Yeah.
asks rapidly.
Yeah. Lokendra? Are you in
Yes.
line? Yeah.
Yes, no, absolutely. I think this is important that how do we standardize things, right? Because um, there has to be parity in terms of understanding from a traveler standpoint also. See, looking at India, we are evolving as a nation in terms of those who are picking up international travel also as a leisure option when they look to take their families out. Now, when you bring so many conditions and implications between when you do a package or when you don't do a package, those in itself create a lot of filtrations in the mind of the end user, whether should they pick up a package or should they just book it separately, and how do they go about it. And also, as we understand that a lot of market in India is still operated through a travel agent network, they will also try and recommend things in a way which will be little light on the pocket of the customer. And also, that would not be the right way how we want to see a more organized and a more sorted way of a travel happening. So that obviously is a concern. I think one more thing that I want to highlight is that, like the way automation is happening across all multiple industries and categories, whether you talk about health tech, fintech, or anything else, as an online travel companies, both of us, we would like to create a self-booking behavior for the end user. And that's where, packages become extremely important, because everything that a customer is looking out for their travel, like, either traveling alone or with family, this is all combined all together to ensure that there is no inconvenience for them at the end of the day. Now, if that has an implication in terms of costing, now that would definitely be taking a backseat. And because of that, this whole ecosystem will again remain, more or less fragmented, which is what is not ideal for a, high scale growth for any category.
But then, how much of it do you think you will put trust on innovating and maybe customer education also on the part where you can claim your TCS? Mohit, anything on those lines you think can actually beef up your confusion or the concern that a customer might have?
No, of course, that's an ongoing journey, right? We've been kind of calling this out since the time the 5% TCS was levied, that this is not a cost implication, it is more a cash flow implication. But what we need to kind of keep in mind, Kavita, over here is a lot of the people who are kind of first-time travelers, or say traveling to say Southeast Asia, Middle East, uh, these locations are not very expensive. The budget outlay on some of these locations is almost similar to what the budget outlay is on a domestic holiday, and therefore, for them having to fork out a significant amount additionally, even if it is a cash flow issue, becomes a little bit of a bottleneck. And particularly when you look at leisure travel, where the family travels together, the amount gets compounded. The other part is, in case you do not really have an ability to offset this credit, in terms of advance payments, because most people are salaried employed and therefore, do not necessarily pay advance tax, then the credit for this amount, which is unutilized, could only come back once the returns are finalized and the refunds are kind of initiated, from the tax department. So it could take a long period, and people would not be very open to kind of waiting for an year and a half, just to get these amounts back in their cash flow.
Lokendra, your take on it? Is there more thrust on innovating and creating customer awareness on this?
Yes, we are already doing that. We are educating customers who are reaching out to us to inform them beforehand, before they make a final plan. Because early days when we were not so proactive in terms of telling them, we definitely saw a sudden dip from the time a customer more or less agrees to go for it, and then there is a 20% part or component around TCS gets introduced. So that is something we've been doing. But I think, again, coming back to that point, which is more important, is that, how do we kind of standardize this, is what I would like to reinstate on. And I want to feel that, can there be something which can be made a little bit more, in the interest of a taxpayer, right? Like Mohit also mentioned, because this 1 year cycle is one very big. Two, this money is important, right? I mean, Any money that one saves for a holiday travel is a money that they save from their savings. And anything on top of it, something that they have to hold it, is going to be a big demotivation. So if there is some way this can be, either made a little bit more flexible in terms of claiming it or adjusting it in some other expenses and, against some other losses, maybe securities or something, I think it could still be a good way to still, fight this battle.
Sure, we'll have to keep an eye and track this issue as to how this rolls out. But in the meantime, thank you so much, both of you, for being on the show and helping our viewers with a complete understanding of this issue. Thank you. We move on in the last leg of the show where we take your queries and have it answered through